This episode of Hello PhD is sponsored by Promega and listeners like you. Thanks for your support.
Side note, my youngest son is in CRISPR camp this summer. They're just genetically modifying whatever organisms they find out in the wild.
Can I do research with you? And she was like, well...
Welcome to Hello PhD, a podcast for scientists and the people who love them. This week, Josh looks back at his illustrious career and shares some insights with the rest of us. Stay with us.
And we're back. This is Hello PhD, episode 178. I'm Joshua Hall.
I'm Daniel Arneman.
And we'll discuss the human side of science and life in the lab. Illustrious career, huh, Dan?
That's what it is, Josh. You let me write the intro. I'm going to write what I feel like.
I won't correct you. How about that?
Okay.
How about that? We'll let listeners decide for themselves.
How illustrious it is. Well, Josh, you and I, as reported, we got together this past week and had a great time, I have to say. I feel like whenever you visit North Carolina now, we try to pack in every possible fun thing to do at once. So we did the escape room, which we beat.
We sure did. We were told 20% of people find their way out of that escape room. So a humble brag. We did make our way out.
It's not a humble brag, just a brag.
Oh, just a brag. Straight up brag.
Yeah, we did make it out. It was a vampire. It was like a Dracula castle escape. So we did that. We ended up getting dinner. And then for the ethanol section this week, unplanned, we ended up at a cocktail bar in Durham called Corpse Reviver. And I think you and I had an experience that neither of us has really had before, which is consuming what are called amari, A-M-A-R-I. Do you remember this, Josh, or was it too late in the night?
I've pushed it from my mind. No, I do remember this, Dan. Maybe our cocktail selections follows some advice that we'll have, foreshadowing some advice that I'll have on this episode today, of going outside your comfort zone and trying some new things and asking for advice from those who may know more than you about certain topics. Because that's what we did. It was almost like a dealer's choice, right? We had, I think, the first round, like the Old Faithful. I had the gin and tonic or something that I knew that I was going to like from this place. And I was tempted, I admit, Dan, I was tempted to just go for one more round of something that I know I like. But I think you were the one that was like, hey, let's mix it up a bit. Let's try something new.
Well, we had heard of these drinks a couple of times in previous times we've been out. And it came to our attention because one of the bartenders said that when bartenders get together, they order something called Fernet. And we said, oh, what do you mean they order this? So there is a bittersweet liqueur called Fernet that I guess this is called the bartender's handshake. When they're going to a bar, this is what they order, and then they know that the other person's also a bartender, and they strike up a conversation apparently about this beverage. But it's part of a class of alcohols called amari, which are bittersweet liqueurs, typically served either before a meal or after a meal in Italy. And I think they kind of came about at the end of the 19th, early 20th century. But what's so cool about these drinks is that it's alcohol steeped with herbs and spices and barks and roots and all sorts of botanicals. So each one has this really distinctive flavor. And Josh, you could say how we drank them, but I think some people are maybe familiar with Aperol, which is one of these Amaro. And Aperol is typically served as a spritz. So if you've had that, you have had an Amaro.
Yeah, that's a great example, Dan. And also, many of these, as you mentioned, have a lot of these really potent flavors. And so a lot of times
medicinal, some would say.
You could say that. These Amaris or Amaros will often be served as mixers, just a little dash of these flavors to give some depth to other cocktails where there are other flavors that are more traditional, like some citrus or some other alcohol flavors. One of those that you see all the time, Angostura bitters, would be an example of one of those that you might see in an old fashioned, right? You might have a couple little dashes of that in with the bourbon and the sugar and all that, but turns out there are those
you can get it served on the rocks if you want to.
Order a whole serving of that. So that's what we did, Dan. That's what we did.
Yeah, they had hidden on the bottom of the menu. There was an Amari, and Amari is the plural, Amaro is the singular. So for the word nicks out there, that's why we're using these different terms. There's a section of the menu that had a list of, I don't know, 15 or 20 different Amari, and you and I, knowing nothing about them, asked our server, what's good? And so I think you ordered the Braulio, although I ended up drinking it because I don't think you liked it very much. And
the Braulio was I put it completely in the hands of the server, and she recommended the Braulio, which then I later saw on the menu ended up being the most expensive and the one at the bottom of the list, which I think actually they may have been organized from lightest flavor to most intense flavor, and this one was at the very bottom.
Yeah, the Braulio was, it comes from the Italian Alps, so it's got this minty kind of juniper flavor. It's intense.
It was intense, Dan. It knocked my socks off more than I could say any other drink I've had in recent memory.
Yeah, I ordered the Chinar, which is, I guess one of the main flavors is artichoke. Although I don't think I got a very artichoke flavor out of it. But anyways, these drinks are very, very sweet and also very, very bitter. And they are meant for sipping and discussing. And it's an experience in a way that I think a lot of cocktails are not. And so I enjoyed it. And I would probably try other flavors just to get that intensity again. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it made for a memorable experience, Dan. So
as you spit Chinar across the room.
I applaud you for taking us on that journey. I don't know that I could say I would regularly make this a part of my of my cocktail ordering or my spirit ordering process, but I'm glad that I did it. And I would happily ask for a smaller serving next time if I could.
I think that's fair. And I should have said this earlier. These were developed as digestive aids, many of them, or in the time when people used botanicals as medicine as well. So some of the ingredients, there's a root called gentian that have been shown to aid in dyspepsia. So some of these ingredients may actually help you digest your food, which is how they're consumed in Italy.
Well, now that you say that, my digestion has never been better than the last week, and now I know why. Now I know
Tell
why.
us more, Josh.
All right, Dan. Well, like you said, we had a great time together, and looking forward to getting back together with you again soon. But in the meantime, why don't we say a thank you to our friends at Promega? So we're going to talk a lot about career goals today. So I'm encouraging you to have career goals in mind, but it's important to make sure you and your PI are on the same page, and one way you can do that is through creation of an individual development plan, or IDP. An IDP ties an employee's responsibilities to learning objectives and professional growth. If you'd like to learn how to write an IDP to really help your career trajectory and career planning, you can learn more about it at promega.com/helloidp.
And Josh, I also want to thank patron Pranav. I don't think we thanked him, although he's been in the Slack channel. I don't think we got it into our episode notes. So thanks again to Pranav, and sorry for the delay.
Thanks a lot, Pranav, and all of our other awesome patrons.
All right, Josh, I'm excited to hear your life story condensed into however many minutes we've allotted for this. So let's get on with it.
All right, Dan. So I thought it'd be interesting to do something a little different. I've been thinking about doing something like this on the show for a while. It has been a long time since you or I really, in an organized way, shared our own experiences and our own trajectories. I think we may have done it to some extent way back. I don't know if it was in the single-digit episodes or maybe
Definitely
in the teens, but we're here at 178, so I think that's been at least 5 years ago. So I think this is useful. One of the things we always want to do on the show is share other people's experiences, things they've learned, pitfalls that maybe they figured out a way through or a way around, so that maybe that will help you if you encounter similar pitfalls, or just to give you some strategies to make your own training or career trajectory easier. And so I'm sure many of these things that I'm going to share in my own trajectory have bubbled up to the surface at one point or another through many of the episodes through the years. But anyways, I was reflecting. I'm hopeful on my own experience. I'm hopeful that maybe there's some lessons here or some nuggets that people listening might be able to take something from to help them in their own career trajectory.
Do as you say, not as you do, right, Josh?
That's exactly right. I'll say from the start, Dan, I really had, when I was first thinking about doing this, I thought, okay, I'm going to just lay out my experience as an undergrad, how I figured out that I even liked research, and how I decided to go to grad school, and how I chose a school, how I chose a lab once I got there, how I shifted my career goals, and ultimately decided on making a career transition, that I could just sort of fit all that into one nice episode. But as you know, Dan, I tend to be a little long-winded, so I think this may have to be a multi-part series. So I think today we might focus a little bit on the early days of my career and how I first even figured out this research was a thing. And I know many of our listeners are at that point in their career where maybe they're an undergrad, maybe they just graduated, they're even just trying to figure out if they want to go to grad school. So I thought I would share my experience going through that similar process.
I was going to say the same thing, Josh. We get emails from lots of listeners who are at that stage. They are pre-PhD, and they listen to the show to prepare themselves to figure out, is this something I want to do? If it is something I want to do, how do I get there? And so I think there are plenty of people who would benefit from that early experience, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
All right, Dan. Well, when I was an undergrad, I ended up pursuing a biology major, and obviously I ended up going the route of a biomedical PhD, and that's been my career experience ever since that time. But I didn't come into college thinking that way. I didn't come into college thinking I wanted to do biology. What I really thought I wanted to do was maybe math or physics, because those are things I did okay with in high school. And I think you had a similar experience to me, Dan. We both went to we grew up in fairly rural places. And I don't know if this is true everywhere, but at least in my experience, where I grew up, if you did well in math or science in school, in high school, it was kind of a given or an expectation that those were the types of things you would pursue as a career. That was my experience. That's how it felt to me. I don't know if that was true, but that's how I internalized it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I certainly ended up on that same path. I don't know that I felt, I'm trying to think back to whether I felt an external pressure to pursue a certain thing. I mean, I was interested in science, and so I ended up studying science, but I can't remember somebody saying, you should go into science and not business administration. Like, I just don't remember that push from my high school.
Yeah, maybe for me, Dan, I've had these other interests, and I remember having these interests at the time. I did things like music. I enjoyed singing. I enjoyed playing guitar at the time. I did theater in high school, and I guess sort of art, humanities expressions were also things that really brought me a lot of joy, maybe even brought me more joy, things that I was really proud of and thought of as my identity back in those days. But I think I always, and again, this could be a me thing, I don't know where this came from, but I think I always separated those out, that like, all right, well, those things should be less important than these things I was doing in school, like doing well in my math class, doing well in my science classes. I should really prioritize these as I move through at least my school life and my professional life, and kind of minimize these other things. And I think, honestly, that could be a shortcoming in the way that I thought about and approached my career in those days.
I think the bias is that it's harder to make a career in music or as an actor, even though those would be exciting careers. I think the general consensus is that's difficult, and you have to get very, very lucky, and also probably work very hard to make success at that. Whereas if you work in the sciences or the legal profession or business, then there are more opportunities. You don't have to wait tables while you hope to be discovered.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Dan. And, as we're having this conversation, as I think about it, I think that's probably why I may have ended up going in certain directions with my career, having that fast forwarding, having that scientific educational background, and having that biomedical PhD, really looking for ways, I guess maybe that were more performative or more creative, ways that I could express or build upon that educational background to do a job that still scratched that itch to a certain point and allowed me to do some of those things I like to do.
Your motivated abilities will keep coming out.
There you go.
Whether you figure that out or not, they will keep showing up.
They sure do. So anyway, around that time, when I came into undergrad, I really did have that mindset. Like, okay, I'm here. I'm going to pursue some kind of math major, or maybe one of the more mathematically inclined sciences, maybe physics or chemistry or something. And I would say for the most part, those plans started getting rethought about the time I started taking upper level college math classes. I think I found that my rural Virginia math training, while I might have been really amazing in those contexts, it was a lot different when I got to my upper level college math. And that really made me rethink my plans.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I was great at calculus in high school. I was not great at calculus in college, it turned out.
Yeah, and you might have been like me, Dan, where I think math in high school was like, oh, this is a fun puzzle to work out. And that was not exactly the experience I had in these upper level math classes. And even, Dan, I took some chemistry classes my freshman year, and it just wasn't doing it for me. They were kind of boring to me, and just, they were not my thing. They were not for me. And it wasn't until, I think it was the second semester of my freshman year, we had to do these freshman seminar classes, and I took this course called Emerging Diseases. And so it was just about 15 of us in the class, and the professor, we read these books talking about different infectious disease, like we talked about Ebola and HIV outbreak and things like that. And that was really the first thing in my college experience that captivated me, that I was like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. I'm not just going to this class to hopefully get a good grade or just to, I don't know, check some requirement off, but like, oh, wow, I really want to learn more about this topic. And it was really that class and that instructor too, who I think, she was clearly really enthusiastic about this topic, and that, that was infectious, if you want to say it a certain way. Thank you. Say to me, like, I want to learn more. And so it was really then that I thought, maybe I should try some biology classes. I really hadn't taken any biology classes. So it wasn't until my sophomore year that I finally took Bio 101. And that really reinforced that, okay, these are interesting topics to me. I actually really liked those scientific courses more than some of the other courses I'd been taking.
That's so interesting. So do you think that spark, that light bulb of not just I'm good at this subject and therefore I should pursue it, I actually want to know more about this on my own. Do you think that just happened because the college class was structured in such a way that it drew out your curiosity as opposed to being fed the material you had to learn in high school? Like, was it just the right place at the right time? Or do you think there's something inherent about the way that biology works that your brain wants to find out more about?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it could have been both because, as I mentioned, even the format of that course that really captivated me was very different than, it wasn't a big lecture course going through, regurgitating information. It was a small number of students. We were reading books on that topic. We were hearing stories, So yeah, maybe that has something to do with it. Although I will say, once I started taking then the large lecture courses about biological topics, I was objectively more interested and eager to learn in those courses than I was like in my math class or in my chemistry class that had a similar format. So, I think it could have been both. But, I'll say this, Stan, too. I don't know, maybe this was just a shortcoming or a bias from my own educational background, at least at the high school level. I remember I had not taken many biology classes, period, because I remember as a student who was doing well in school, in high school, the actual structure of taking classes was if you did well, like in your 8th grade science and math courses, you skipped biology to take chemistry early. Yeah. So normally you would, in the county where I was in school, you would normally take chemistry in 10th grade. But if you did well in 8th grade in math and stuff, then they would accelerate you and you would take chemistry in 9th grade at the expense of taking biology.
And never take biology.
So I actually never had it, and even then, I ended up going to this, there was this consortium of other rural counties. We had this, we called it governor's school, but it was like what's the word? Sort of like a magnet type school for half a day. And it was students from all these different counties. And you could take biology or chemistry or physics. And the students who were more mathematically inclined were sort of shoved into this chemistry physics track. and everyone else took biology. So I think I also, just the way that structure that I was exposed to, that was reinforced to me, almost made me think like, oh, well, if you're like a serious student, you don't take biology.
That's interesting. I wonder if that's happening more generally, like in a national sense. If a lot of programs view biology, or a lot of schools say, view biology as less advanced than chemistry or physics, and therefore are shunting some of their best students into those other fields as opposed to biology.
Yeah, I think that could be true. I'd be interested to hear from other people. I mean, it's worth noting as well that this was the mid to late 90s, so it's possible. I'm sure there are many things that happened educationally then that hopefully we've gotten better at. Maybe there are other things we've gotten worse at since then too. But yeah, I think that was true for me and could be true for other people. And so only by happen chance did I sort of stumble into biology in college, where I almost was completely sort of steered away from it, you could almost say, in high school. So yeah, that's.
But you had a lot of catching up to do. You hadn't learned the Krebs cycle 5 times in a row yet.
I had not, and Dan, this is going to really sound maybe funny. I think students now, like my kids, know about DNA and they know about ATGC and all that, and they're like elementary, middle school. But I'm not trying to date us, but even things like the human genome being sequenced, that was just happening around that time. DNA, learning about the genetic code and what that meant, wasn't necessarily part of the standard curriculum when I was in high school. And so it honestly, Dan, was not until my first semester of my sophomore year taking Biology 101 that I was learning about molecular biology and really details of DNA and genetics for the first time. And so encountering that information for the very first time was fascinating. I was like, wow, this is
amazing.
Really cool stuff. So it really did captivate me.
Side note, my youngest son is in CRISPR camp this summer. They're just genetically modifying whatever organisms they find out in the wild. It's great.
Yeah, kids these days, it's great what they have access to. So I'm in these biology classes, and that's all going well, and I'm, I guess, happy on one level that I've finally found something that I'm really interested in college. But I can remember also sort of looking around and having conversations with some of the other people in my classes. And at least at my school, most of these people who were biology majors, they were pre-med students. I would say the majority
Absolutely.
of them were pre-med students or some other pre-health profession. And so I thought, like, well, okay, if that's what most everybody else here is doing, maybe that's what I should do as well. So I can remember, I have this distinct memory from those days going to a pre-med club meeting, and it was in the evening. I remember going after dinner one night back to the biology building, and there was a speaker there who was talking about how you go to med school and what it's like. I think maybe he was a doctor, and he was talking a little bit about that. And it occurred to me during that meeting, like, I really don't like hospitals at all. Like, I really hate being in those environments. Why would I want to do that as a job? That actually sounds
doesn't make
terrible. So, I had that revelation that I can really stands out in my mind. But that got a little bit stressful because now suddenly I was like, okay, well, I'm in this situation where I'm taking these classes. I think I know what I'm interested in, but now I have this uncertainty about, well, what do I want to do with that after college? Am I going to end up being unemployed? Like, what do I do now? Maybe should I try to switch majors because maybe this isn't the right thing to get the kind of job that I want?
Yeah, you just got on the highway that leads to Chicago, and you're like, but I don't want to go to Chicago. Like, and
Exactly.
where else are you going to go?
Exactly. And to compound those issues and to make matters worse, like I mentioned, I was from a pretty rural area, and so I didn't have any experiences or I didn't really know people who had experiences with scientists or with research. That wasn't anything I knew about in those days. And I can remember a conversation that I had around that time with my parents along the lines of, hey, I like these biology classes. I think I want to be a biology major, but I don't want to do medicine. And I remember in that conversation, it really came up like, well, the only things you can really do with biology major are something healthcare related, or you can be a park ranger.
Both good options.
Well, I didn't want to be a doctor. I knew that for sure, but I was like, well, maybe a park ranger wouldn't be so bad. I do like the outdoors.
Be all right. You like camping and fishing. I have no idea what a park ranger does. I would like to point that out, obviously.
True. So, I think that left me with a lot of questions and honestly, even a lot of advice from people I knew personally from back home who they didn't really know a lot about what was available, almost trying to dissuade me, from that major, from that career path. And so anyway, I think in the midst of all that, an important thing that I eventually did was actually utilize my academic advisor. And at my school, at least, anyone who was a junior who had declared a major, they assigned someone in your department to you as an academic advisor. This was usually a faculty member. And so I decided to actually schedule a meeting with her, and this was the first time I had met with her, and decided to just be open about some of these things I was thinking about. That I liked my biology classes just fine, but had no interest in pre-med and no clue where this was leading me and what I was going to do after college. And that meeting ended up being one of those trajectory-altering moments. I can really remember specific things about that meeting, including her saying, well, have you thought about doing research? And the honest answer was no. Honestly, didn't even know research was a thing. I guess I knew on one level that there were these people called scientists. Like I knew scientists existed and that probably they did research, but that didn't feel like a thing that was out there for me to do. That was not a thing that was approachable. Like I wouldn't have even known how would you pursue that.
Right, you see it in headlines. Scientists have discovered a new planet, or scientists have uncovered the cause of this disease. But who are these people, and how did they get to be what they are?
Yeah, and I think it was really eye-opening for me when she went on to explain that most of the faculty in the department who were there teaching my courses, that many of them also had labs and were actually scientists. And beyond that, they had students who were in their labs working, doing research. So my next question...
Like this hidden other world.
It really was. It really was. It was like the scales fell from my eyes. I was like, wow, I didn't know this existed. So, I think an obvious next question that I had was, well, can I do research with you? And she was like, well...
You show up saying, I don't know what I want to do. She's like, how about research? And you're like, okay, do you do research? Yes. Can I do research with you, please? Are you my mommy?
Well, my lab's kind of full at the moment, which I know now on the other side. Like, oh, well, that's code for, I don't know.
Nope. You're a person who didn't know they wanted to do this 10 minutes ago.
That'd be a great student to bring into your lab. What could go wrong? But, to her credit, she did follow up and say that there was this new faculty member who had just arrived, and of all things, he was a microbiologist who studied infectious disease. So
she foists you off onto this other guy.
That is exactly what happened, Dan. And, honestly, I know you mentioned being at my alma mater a few weeks ago. I think it would be fascinating to interview him, to hear his side of the story, but that is exactly what happened. And I think in retrospect, he was probably, as a new person, desperate for people in his lab. So he was kind enough to actually take me into his lab. I kid you not, Dan, I can remember going into his lab on the first day, and I really had this moment where I felt like all of a sudden, wow, this is what I want to do. Like, these are my people. This is a thing that I could really get behind, that I think could be really interesting to do. Yeah, Dan, I know a lot more about science training and what motivates students now than I did back then. And, looking back on it, I can now understand that there were likely other things at play that led me to have that positive viewpoint of the lab beyond just research is amazing and it's my calling. It's the one true thing.
How we all feel,
me.
Josh.
Yeah. Well, I realized that, first of all, I was in an environment at this school. It was like a smaller liberal arts type school. There were no PhD students. There were no postdocs. I mean, certainly research there was happening at a much slower pace than at the types of school where we did our PhD. But as an undergrad there, the experience that I was able to have was to just jump right in and be part of an independent project and learn to have that responsibility of a real project and really grow to be a leader in that lab environment as an undergrad if I wanted to be. And I don't know that I personally would have connected with the experience of being an undergrad at a big school quite as much, where, maybe I would have ended up in a lab or matched with a PI, but, you'd end up washing dishes for the first 6 months. And if that goes well, maybe we'll pair you with a postdoc to help out with their project. And, in that environment, you can really be kind of low on the ladder for quite some time as an undergrad. But where I was, I was able to hit the ground running, and I still have an affinity for those types of environments to this very day.
I was going to say, do you recommend when you're talking to high school students or somebody who maybe has an interest in research, do you guide them toward a small liberal arts college or toward a tier 1 research university and explain to them the differences? Because I can imagine for you, it may have been a total turnoff and you would have gone to be a park ranger, right? If you had gotten the wrong experience.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there are a lot of considerations that people have when choosing an undergrad institution, when choosing where to go to college. It might be the location, like the proximity to family or your support system, or maybe you want it to be far away from that. I don't know. Or it might be the financial implications, the cost of going to a certain school, or, it might be a desire for a bigger school and the things that has to offer, or not wanting that. That was not something I wanted. That was actually appealing to me to go to somewhere that was a little bit smaller. So I don't know that I would encourage someone to choose. I think there are a lot more things to think about when choosing an undergrad institution than just what kind of research experience you might have. But what
you happen to get lucky.
I can say for me personally, I can see how that environment and that experience at that type of school was a real positive experience for me, which is not to say you can't have a positive experience at a bigger school, because the challenge is there are a lot more opportunities to get involved in research at a larger school than a smaller school.
Right.
And I know this to be true today. I mean, I still actually am quite close with my undergrad advisor and some other folks there. And there are a lot fewer faculty in those departments that are doing research, and there are a lot more students who might approach them wanting to get experience in their lab. So, and I think that's only intensified. And I'll say one more, I guess, consideration or maybe disadvantage from a grad school point of view. I think graduate programs have gotten more competitive over the years since those days when you and I were applying to grad school.
Absolutely. They let me in, Josh. So that tells you something.
Well, I mean, truthfully, when we were going through the process, we've talked about this on the show, we both went straight from undergrad to graduate school. I know you went to a slightly larger, like a research intensive institution, not like the one I went to, but the fact that I was able to go to graduate school, get into graduate programs directly, having only done research for about a year and a half at a small liberal arts school, I think that would not be a given today. I think admissions committees in a more competitive environment really value students, for better or worse, that have had research experience at a more research-intensive institution. That's why we've talked about multiple times on the show when talking about being more competitive. If you went to a smaller school, even if you did research, that experience may not be valued by an admissions committee as much as if you worked as a technician for a year at a Research One institution or spent a summer or two. Maybe you need to leave your small school environment for a summer to go to a big school to do research. So while that was a really good nurturing experience for me at that time, that certainly motivated me to do grad school, I think the reality these days is most students who really want to go to grad school are going to need to seek out experiences beyond the small school. Whereas if you're an undergrad at a big school, those experiences are right there on your campus. So pros and cons, sense. I guess I would say. But beyond just the environment, I can see now how a really key factor for me, and this is independent of what type of environment, but I think this is the type of person maybe you're looking for. I can see now how my advisor, he really contributed to making me feel excited about the science and the research and making me feel like I was part of it and could do it. So I think in the moment, I didn't appreciate how he was a driving factor of the way I felt positive about it. I just thought like, wow, research is cool. I mean, that was the only experience I had with research was him.
But you happened to just have a really great mentor in that moment.
I did.
What you were responding to is good mentorship, maybe more than good research.
I think so. And Dan, we've heard so many stories on here and have met and talked to so many students through the years where a PI can have the exact opposite effect on a student's perception of research. A bad advisor, a bad mentor can demotivate students. And honestly, they could make someone who's approaching research for the first time walk away from the lab or science thinking that it's not an environment for them.
It happens every single day.
All the time. And so, I can It's worth noting as well, I was a white guy, like going into the lab. I think that experience can be even exacerbated if you're an individual who's from a group that's underrepresented in science, where there's not even people who look like you that you can even turn to or see in those environments regularly. And so I think there are a lot of ways that people can be turned away from research by having a bad or even a neutral advisor, to be honest. So I think finding environments where you have that positive mentorship and positive PI can have a big impact on your career trajectory and your decision to even persist in that career. But I was fortunate to have that really great mentor who I think set me on, who just made me interested to keep coming back.
And remind me, because you a couple of years have passed, right? You're not a freshman when you find this research experience in college.
Yeah, that's a great point. At this point, by the time I find this lab and start coming, I'm in my second semester of my junior year.
Wow.
So I'm really nearing the end at this point. And so just to make sure that's clear, I've figured out research existed for the first time the spring semester of my junior year. I've got less than a year and a half remaining in college. And, obviously I ended up going on to a PhD program. I got through it. I did a postdoc. I got in a career that was really rewarding, et cetera, et cetera. Like things, the end of the story, I guess, was good enough. But I think it's important to remind people and to point that out, that there is no one true path to graduate school. I mean, there certainly are some students out there who they get involved in research from day one in undergrad. I've even encountered some students who got research experience in high school, and then they work for 4 years and every summer and they do all this stuff. But that's not the norm. That's actually not typical. And lots of students who go on to grad school don't have that experience. And some students discover research even later than I did. Maybe they try it out for the first time after they finish undergrad. And we've gotten letters from those types of folks. And there are ways to get those experiences and do just fine. But I think what was important, at least for me, when I think back, was utilize the support networks that were around me to actually get advice from people who were there and their job was to give me advice, which seems obvious, but like I said, I had this academic advisor available to me, and I'm sure the program even encouraged me to reach out to that person for like a year before I did. But it wasn't until I was in sort of the depths of despair that I did, and it was really helpful. So I'd encourage people, if you have, whether you're in grad school or in undergrad or wherever, there are probably people whose job it is to help you, to give you advice, who are trained, they know what's out there, they can listen to what you're thinking and help you move towards the right path. So I think it was important to utilize those support networks.
Yeah, and I want to add here, the person listening to us right now probably has some interest in pursuing a PhD, and so they know this path exists, but certainly they have friends or somebody in their life that maybe is struggling in that same way and doesn't exactly know what the path looks like. And I think you can encourage that person to go talk to their academic advisor, somebody that lives in your dorm or is a friend of yours or lives in the same apartment complex, whatever it is, in your classes. These resources exist. And I think, Josh, to your point, you didn't know this entire career path existed. And so there are plenty of career paths like that for people listening and for people who aren't listening but are 3 degrees of separation. And so using those resources is good advice no matter where you are.
Yeah, and the advice really works as well, even if you are, I know we have a lot of grad students who listen too. If you are a grad student, there's relevant advice here for you too. There likely are people in your graduate office or in your department whose job it is to help you navigate the PhD training. So if you're hitting a snag with your PI or your progress or your committee or whatever, there probably are people there who can give you some advice and some perspective on how to get through it. And I know there are people in grad school who are having the same levels of doubt and stress about their career path after grad school, the same as I was after undergrad. There are ways you can pursue thinking about what might be out there for you. There are probably careers out there that might be an awesome fit for you that you don't even know about right now. And so taking the time to figure that out is a game changer. That's right. That's Dr. Park Ranger to you, Dan.
Exactly.
I guess the second thing I would say beyond seek out advice from people who are there to help you is also be open to trying something new. When I think back, this wasn't necessarily in my nature to do this, but the fact that it really turned out I went from learning research was a thing to then getting involved in research in literally like a day.
Wow.
Which is, I mean, that's kind of a unique situation. But if you do find out about something that, even if something brand new to you that sparks some curiosity, like channel that curiosity, channel that moment and that boost in motivation and enthusiasm to just go pursue that. And, maybe you'll discover it's not for you, but I think having an open mind and being willing to follow those leads when they pop up really could lead you somewhere career altering.
Yeah, it's great advice.
All right, Dan, I know I've said a lot so far. The story has definitely gone on longer than I anticipated it would. But I wanted to share one final memorable moment around that time that stands out to me that really was a game changer. And again, this is more important information that I didn't know. This information is probably something that many of our listeners do know, but I think the fact I didn't know it and it was so important in clarifying my goals, I always make sure I just explicitly say it so people know it. I can remember that summer after my junior year, I ended up staying on campus to continue doing research. Because again, at that time, I really loved doing research and the opportunity to do more of it was really appealing to me. And I can remember my PI coming in and asking me, saying, "Hey, have you ever thought about going to grad school?" And at the time, I hadn't really considered that at all because I didn't think I could afford more school. And I remember him just sort of looking at me kind of perplexed. And then these are the words that really did change my life. And I'm only half joking when I say that. He said, they pay you to go to graduate school. And I really was like, what do you mean they pay me to like do this? That's like too good to be true, which is hilarious, for me to think now. But at the time,
if only you had known.
If only I had known. But it really did sound too good to be true. And I can remember I was staying in the dorm that summer, going back to my dorm room that night, logging on to the internet, and reflecting back, there was internet back in those days. But I can remember going online and doing some research on a few PhD programs in microbiology, which was the type of lab I was in. And sure enough, I found all these schools that I'd heard of that were in my region that had these PhD programs in microbiology, and they had information about what it was like to be a student in those programs. And sure enough, every one of them, they were paying your tuition, and they would give you like $18,000 a year. And
whoa!
I couldn't believe it.
High roller.
I know. And so
that is
really
what we started at, isn't it? It's around what we started at.
I think you and I started at $18,500 per year was our.
Oh, the 500 really makes it better.
It really did. It really did.
But to your point, that not everybody's getting that, and you say they pay me to go to grad school. That is true for this very narrow subset of grad schools in some of the STEM fields, right? That are grant funded.
Yep.
It's not true for our humanities friends. It's not true for our friends in the law grad schools, and obviously not medical school. So, what an opportunity for people that maybe didn't think about going on because of those financial constraints. There's a way for you to get through it without going further into debt.
Yeah, and I think it's worthwhile for people to, finances are a very real restraint and consideration that we all face no matter what we pursue. And so I think what was important to me in that moment was I didn't know. I was either consciously or subconsciously making decisions about my career based on information that I didn't have. And so I think it's important as you're thinking about careers, go ahead and look into them, at least get all the information. And so for me, just knowing oh, wow, as a PhD student in this field I'm interested in, I'll actually be financially supported to do that. That was a real game changer. And so maybe depending on what you want to pursue, it's the opposite. Maybe there's a cost to doing it. Maybe that will factor in for you. So anyway, I always take every moment I can to make sure people know what I did not know, that at least in the sciences, pursuing a PhD is something they will usually pay you to do. And I don't think that's a reason on its own to go do those things, but it's a good perk if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, certainly not. Don't go into it for the money because you think grad school is going to be so lucrative, but it may remove a barrier to you getting there.
Definitely. And so I think the last thing I want to say is another reason that this sort of moment in time in my career journey stands out to me is it kind of goes back to the beginning of what I was talking about, where I was going through school, I was going through my career path, and there are other moments in my career path where I can remember having a lot of stress. And in those moments that were the most stressful, they were times where I didn't have a clear goal. I didn't have a clear vision of where this was taking me. And I think part of why those couple of clarifying moments really stand out to me, even today, years later, is they really were, at least for me, a remedy to a lot of stress, because suddenly I had a goal. I had something I could work towards. I kind of knew where this was headed. And again, there are times, and I'll talk about this maybe on later episodes, where your goals can change. You can decide the thing you thought you wanted to do is not what you want to do, and that's totally okay. But at least for me, finally identifying a goal really did change things. And those were some of the times in my career where I was the least stressed and the most productive, because I had something tangible that I was working towards.
Here. Same experience on this side. And it's the not knowing, it's the not having somewhere to put your energy. You can't work towards something. The future looks hazy, and that haziness makes it feel dark. And just having that little pinprick of light of, I want to go do this, and I don't know how I'm going to get there, and it's going to be tough, and there are all these things in my way, but at least I know I'm walking in that direction, I think changes everything. So finding that thing for yourself is difficult, obviously, and it's individual, and people can help you with it, but nobody can do it for you. But once you find it, it is revelatory. It gets you out of depression and anxiety about the future and into, well, things may not be great at this moment, but they will get better.
Definitely. And that's what we want for everyone who's listening, listening to this show and going through their training. And we know there are people at all different stages of their career. And maybe after going through all this, that would be the encouragement I would have, no matter where you are in the career path, whether you're in undergrad now or you're sort of in the in-between graduate school and thinking about grad school, or maybe you're in or between undergrad and grad school, maybe you're slogging your way through graduate school or a postdoc right now. It can be very easy, almost like the default. And Dan, you and I know, have both been here, where you don't have a clear goal, you're feeling stressed, and you just keep doing the same thing day in and day out. You kind of get in that rut, like, well, I'm going to go back in, I'm going to do this again. I don't know why. But I guess the encouragement maybe we would have for you is put some effort in, maybe this week for the first time, put some effort into thinking about your next step. What might you want to do? Pursue some leads, talk to some advisors, talk to some people who might have some information about careers or graduate programs or whatever it is, because it really can change your whole outlook once you identify some goal to work towards. I know it did for me. I know it did for you, Dan, and I think it would for our listeners as well.
Awesome, Josh. Now, I know this is not the end of your career story, because you didn't stop as an undergrad. So I expect we're going to hear more about this topic.
I sure hope so, Dan. If you'll have me back on the show, I'd be happy to share more.
I'm going to have to talk to my co-host and see if he approves.
All right, Dan. Well, certainly it's been cathartic, I think, for me to relive these times many years ago in my life.
I think it's fun to think back that far. I mean, I don't often think back to those undergrad days, but it is kind of entertaining to be able to look back and see where you took a turn. And you've been able to describe them with sort of pinpoint accuracy. I don't know that everybody has those light bulb moments where they talk to one person and it changes the course of their career, but you have them, and it's puts in such stark relief those moments in our lives when everything changes, even though nothing really changed. Everything changed.
That's right. And if you have moments like that you can think of, or you just have other topics you'd like us to explore more on the show, we'd love to hear about that too. You can always email us, podcast@hellophd.com. You can send us a tweet at hellophd. If you like the show, you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcasting platform. We love your feedback. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a patron. Simply go to our website, hellophd.com, click the Become a Patron button, or you can visit patreon.com/hellophd. We would appreciate the beer money or the Amari bitters.
Amari money.
Amari money. Amari money, Amari problems, Dan.
Exactly.
All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks for indulging me today, Dan, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
All right, Josh. Well, we'll see you next time.
See you next time.